like parts of the progressive lens, what we should be knowing. So I'll just go there. So we spoke about anatomy, we spoke about power maps, markings on the progressive, key parameters. Like I would want to again just touch base on the key parameters. Ideally, we were discussing about this, fitting cross, your micro engravings, distance between 50 fitting cross is like 34 mm, right? And then we spoke about the fitting cross, sorry, distance between micro engravings is 34 mm. Fitting cross to prism reference point is it depends on manufacturer. It can be 0, it can be 2 mm, 4 mm, 6 mm. And then your prism reference point to the center of the reading circle, this generally is called as inset, and this happens to be at 2.5 mm. These measurements will actually help you understand a lot of, this will help you during the troubleshooting. We will be touching base on troubleshooting in quite some time, but during the next session. But these numbers will actually help you do a lot of troubleshoot, because this will help you understand what is required for your consumer in at the end of the day. One more important parameter is your corridor. Generally, progressive corridor here, what is included is about 40% of the near circle, which is like minimum fitting height. And if you ask about pure corridor, then it is from the place where the power starts till the top of the reading circle. Okay. Corridor, as you know, can be a short corridor or a regular corridor. Today, we are going to speak about, majorly on the frame selection and also how the design will impact on the frame selection. Before pitching into the details, I would also want to touch base on one aspect, which is bifocals, right? I'm just moving on with my slides. I'll just share with you on the bifocals, right? So why bifocal? Why we are just touching base on this is because obviously last week when we were doing the session, we directly jumped into progressive. But when it comes to presbyopic correction, you're very well aware that bifocals are still in existence, and not majorly only for presbyopia, but also for some special dispensing, if there is a requirement of addition to be prescribed in kids with accommodative related anomalies. If there is an accommodative esotropia, basically this also helps. And Also your bifocal supports myopia control. So there's a lot of research on this, but this lenses, this design was it's a very old design, like 18th century Benjamin Franklin. You're aware that he was the one who founded this bifocal design. And it is cost effective presbyopic correction. When I say cost effective, basically developing countries and still majority of people in developing countries prefer bifocals. Now, within bifocals, there are three, like executive, D segment, and round segment. What I would want to know from you basically is like, out of three, which one will have more image jump and why? If you can just quickly put on the chat box, like from your experience. You have three bifocals here. You have executive, you have D segment, you have round segment. From your experience, out of the three bifocals, which one will have highest image jump and why? I see some answers coming in. Very good. Thanks for cooperating. So I'll just based on the responses coming in, I have like three people talking about round, two people D. For every question that I'm asking, I'll just wait for 30 seconds for everybody to give me your responses, and then maybe we'll go further down to understand the concept. Okay, apex to apex joined. Ramakant says D. We get executive bifocal options. Round. So it's a mix, like, okay, fine, fair enough. Okay, so I'll just quickly move on to the explanation. Here, basically, executive bifocal, you can see this blue actually indicates your addition power. Now, obviously, the image jump is going to be higher based on your addition. But when it comes to design, you have to just imagine, like, I'll just convert this into a laser pointer so it becomes easy for us. So imagine you have an eye here at the red dot, right? From the red dot, basically, accessing your near zone is much easy. Now, when it comes to executive bifocal, definitely executive bifocal will also have optic center, which is not placed here, but it is placed somewhere here. Okay. Optic center of this particular top segment is going to be here. It is going to be here. Now, for the eye, which is placed here at the optic center, to access the optic center of the executive bifocal is way far, right? So maybe when I'm trying to read, I'll be using the periphery here. And this is going to actually cause the image jump. Okay. Now imagine, like, this is the distance that my eye is traveling from the center zone of distance to center zone of near. Now this is your executive. Okay. Let us come to D segment. Now what happens in D segment, basically, this is placed too low in the diagram as such, but what happens is generally the D segment is designed in a way wherein your optic center of the distance portion and the top of the D segment is 4 mm apart, 4 to 5 mm apart, right? And D segment, basically the optic center is just sitting here. Okay, so imagine optic center here and optic center here, the distance. Okay, and optic center here and optic center here, the distance. Basically, this optic center, why majorly I'm focusing on optic center? Because the light will pass without a deviation, right? There's no apex to apex as such. Now let us check the round bifocal. So again, like, executive bifocal from here till here. Okay. For D segment from here to here. Now round bifocal, like say it works on a similar concept like D bifocal, like 4 mm above. So maybe if this is the optic center, and for round segment, again, the exact center of this segment, you will have optic center. So from here till here. Okay. Now to keep it very simple as a concept, not getting confused, you have to just keep in your mind the overall uh, distance between the optic center of distance and near zone. Now, longer this distance, greater the image jump. Shorter the distance, lesser the image jump. Okay. So this one from here to here. Okay. This one from here to here, and this one from here to here. Now, if my explanation was simple to follow, I would want to know what will be your answer now. Which of the three bifocal is going to have the highest image jump? You can share your responses on the chat box. I'm just waiting for your responses. Quick one. Definitely, there is an explanation on this. Currently, now I am just making it very simple for all of you to follow your optic center of the distance zone and the near zone, because it is by only two segments. The idea is here to, like, have a clear concept. Whoever has spoken about cryptok bifocal or a round bifocal, they are right. Executive bifocal is the next one which will have the next higher image jump, and your D bifocal will have the least image jump. Okay, so keep this as a simple, definitely, like, if your distance is going to be myopic and then you have addition, then the prismatic effect changes. Sometimes it cancels and the image jump changes. If your distance is going to be hyperopic, it changes. But general rule that you have to keep in mind is optic center of distance zone and optic center of near zone. If the space between these two optic center is longer, then that particular bifocal is going to have your higher image jump. I also want to cover one more important aspect here, which you should always remember, like C for the DSEG and executive segment. Now, if you have a client who is already using one of these two designs, right? They are used to a full clear zone in a very short distance. Okay. For person who is using a round bifocal, they are used to a very clear zone. When I say very clear zone, prismatic free clear area at a longer distance. Okay. So ideally, if you have to relate this with progressive dispensing as well, your round segment would adapt to a regular corridor much easier than your D-seg. So if you are thinking of dispensing or converting your existing bifocal consumer to a progressive consumer, what you have to keep in mind is if the person is a round top bifocal, cryptok bifocal or wearer, you are open to any design. You can actually try regular corridor, you can try mid corridor. It's absolutely fine because they are used to moving their eyes more, right? But for DSEG, generally they will be much comfortable with a shorter version of a progressive design. I hope this was clear. This is like a very practical tip. Always remember this. You can always go back, do a further reading on this. Just for the want of time, I'll just move on. But it's a very simple slide. You need to understand basic concept, optic center to optic center, longer the distance, more the image jump. That is number one. Second thing, longer the distance, they are more keen or they can be easily converted to a regular progressive because regular progressive is also going to have a longer progressive corridor. Okay, now having said that, let me move on. Coming to measurements on the bifocal, all of us are aware, right? Like, basically, this is the measurement that we are taking. Ideally, I have just two questions here again. Like, I'm not getting very deep here, but my question is, in case your lower lid margin, okay, for some reason, for laxity or like, it has become loosened, and if the lower lid margin is hanging, what will be the reference mark? How you will do the marking for the bifocal? Anybody on the chat box? I'll wait for 30 seconds. If your lower lid margin is loose and your entire cornea is exposed, what will be the mark that you will be taking for your bifocal segment? What will be the segment height? I just got one response. Yeah, Imran, good. Okay, lower limbal area, limbus. Good. So basically, like, I got few responses on limbus. So basically, just imagine if the lid was not there, then you will see the cornea which is exposed. The lower limbus margin can be taken as consideration. Now, what about kids? Like I told you, like, we can use bifocals for, I would say, some conditions wherein we need to support accommodation, some conditions wherein there is esotropia, accommodative esotropia, some conditions like controlling myopia. Now, for all these cases, what do you think? How should we take the measurement of bifocal for kids? What should be the, like, generally, like, what should be the overall? Okay, for kids, lower pupil margin. Thanks, Maria, for that. I'll wait for more response. Lower pupil margin. Great. Okay. Go on. And this is for everybody. Like, bifocals are used for various applications, and people who are into pediatric optometry, they know they don't see bifocal as just another design to correct presbyopia, but like, there's many applications for which they are using it. And I got response from Shruti as well on the call. She says yes, lower pupil margin. Basically, I did some own research to understand, and what I found from majority of the sources, and I would say few valid sources, basically is like, the recommendation is this. Okay, so the correct positioning is bisect the pupil. Now, I would not say the responses which I got is like, incorrect. Basically, It depends on the distance refraction, right? If you find the child to have hyperopia, and you're suggesting an ad, you would want them to reach to that ad at the quickest, because if there is going to be a head movement, then the compliance is going to be bad. Second thing, if it is going to be myopic, and if you're going to have this kind of bisection, and if the myopia is greater than one diopter, then the kid would definitely not be very compliant to glasses. So have your own clinical experience added. It is always okay. Like, there are two basically, like, measurements which are recommended. One is bisecting the pupil. I would say, like, it is same like taking your progressive marking. And the other one is the lower border of the pupil. Okay, so lower margin of pupil, a slightly lower thing. What you see in the image here is it is about 3 foot of the pupil. Okay, so basically, just remember this when we are taking bifocals. For adult, we are giving a good clear zone, right? And we are taking marking at the lower limbus or the lid margin, lower lid margin. But when it comes to kids, we don't want them to, like, do that movement down. The moment, like, they are looking down, they should be able to access the near zone. And the near zone is actually to support accommodation or taking care of requirement. Also, like, is helpful in the myopia control. So with that, let me just move on. If you have any questions, please park it for now. And in the end of this, at the end of the session, maybe we can discuss this. Okay, moving on. There is a, like, you would have come across a term called as no line bifocal or a freeform bifocal. Basically, what happens here is, unlike the previous generation where you have, like, fused buttons and stuff, uh, which will have a clear demarcation line. As you see here, the line is quite evident. Okay, here the example is taken of a Cryptok bifocal. Again, when we say RS, basically, like, in the free form, they'll just mention R is round segment and 28 is the size of the overall button. Okay. Now, what happens, the advantage with the free form lens is the overall, zone or the button is near about invisible. Okay. So if you look at this, quite obvious, but at the same angle, when we are looking at this, basically, at first, like, you are searching where is the button, right? It is here, very minimalistic. Why basically you're not seeing as a huge demarcation is because this is done at the back surface. It is done with the freeform technology, and this is your no line bifocal. So ideally, even when we consider bifocal lenses, your Cryptok bifocals are considered to be like an invisible bifocal to an extent compared to your D bifocal and executive, right? But within Cryptok, if we are using a freeform technology, then you get a button which is nearly about invisible. So there's no demarcation line. But yes, you can always identify where is the top of the segment, and this segment has to be then fixed based on the segment height that you have taken. Okay, so let us come to the frame selection. Now, I believe, like, based on my past experience, also this is a very common finding in the optical practice these days. I would say still the clinical practice um, is very clear in terms of what are the deliverables. Mostly the focus is mainly on the vision requirement. But when it comes to say an optical environment, as you all are aware that glasses are considered to be an accessories, and people would want to really uplift their overall yeah, like, looks with the spectacle, they may end up into, like, frames which are really challenging. Now, for you to be very sure whether you can dispense or not, always, like, there are three recommendations. One is, like, check the old frame. Like, when you're checking the old frame, you get to know what kind of shape, what kind of color, and what are the preferences from the customer. Okay. You can also ask for what they like in those particular frame, because sometimes we believe that customer would want a light frame or a big frame, or, like, they are looking for something only from the fashion perspective, but sometimes it is as simple as they just want a lenses which can be cleaned easily, a lens which is light in weight, a frame which is comfortable to wear, all that. So you will always have to understand what your customer is liking about the old frame. That is number one. Second, always consider adjustable frames. Okay, when I say adjustable frames, the frame should be able, we should be able to do some easy pantoscopic tilt. The frame has nose pad because just in case, God forbid, if we go wrong with the markings, the nose pad will always ensure that fitting height actually can be adjusted. Sometimes the wrap of the frame can help you cover the PD errors which are 0.5. Okay, and always recommend and let the customer decide. Now the challenge when it comes to selecting a frame for your progressive lens, and even this is applicable to bifocal as well, but for bifocal the major challenge would come only about matching the PD, because when it comes to bifocal you cannot follow the exact PD. Like say for example, if a consumer has a PD right eye 31, left eye 34, you will have to come to overall, an average PD, because the segment otherwise would look in out, which cosmetically will not be beneficial for the consumer. But when it comes to progressive, you can actually follow the PD exactly. Now, there are few shapes from the very beginning which we try to avoid when it comes to progressive lens. But generally, this should not be the case, right? With the modern designs, with modern progressives, you have a lot of options to customize your designs. Now, what I'm going to just cover here, and this was also put up on our post, is basically I just want to give you all an understanding with a simple animations as to what shape, how the shape and overall your progressive designs will have an impact. Three common shapes which are you will have to be really careful. When I say careful, it is not that you should not be dispensing progressive here, but you have to be careful about dispensing. One is your cat eye round frame. Here you'll get deceived. Why you have to be careful on the round frame is because the top portion, you see, you get a real good distance zone. So generally, the whole I would say the benchmarking of distance zone to be 12 mm, 13 mm doesn't hold good here, because you can also have distance zone as big as 15, 18, 20, 22, right? So you'll have to be careful what you are actually giving as. So basically, fitting height plays a very important role when it is round shape. And aviator. Now, aviator and cat eye is not recommended for the reason that they may actually cut the reading zone based on the pupil. Now, for our better understanding, what I have done is I've just created a very simple animation. Let us see what is happening with the cat eye shape. Okay. Now, let us take PD for the customer, which is say right eye 31, left eye 32, and the fitting height of 22. Okay. So from bridge to this 31, 32, and the fitting height from bottom to top is about 22. Now, if I'm going to place a progressive lens, with the fitting cross coming exactly on top of the pupil mark. Okay. Now, what you see here is basically the design seems to be fitting well. Okay. You can see here, first thing is you will need a bigger diameter. Like when you see here, it is almost at the edge, right? Because the size is so huge, this PD, maybe you will need a bigger diameter. Number two, what you can see is the reading zone here is cut. Okay, you only get hardly about 20 to 30% of the reading zone. Distance is compromised because what you see is from the fitting cross till the top where the distance is marked. This is generally going to be about 6 to 8 mm, but you see that there is a very minimum zone that the person gets. Imagine if this customer is going to be a myopic, then definitely they are going to not feel good, because they will need a distance which is equally important. If they are low myopia, it's fine. If they are low hyperopia, it is fine. Okay, so if they have low minus power, or low plus power, it is still okay. But where the challenge would come is it's a long corridor and the reading zone gets cut. So in regular corridor, this could be a challenge. Now, what could be the solution for this customer? So for the left eye, what I have taken is I have just taken a short corridor design. So basically you can see that corridor length here, there's a variation. And when you are actually selecting a correct corridor, basically it will make sure that the entire zone fits well within the requirement. Okay. So one thing is like if your corridors are selected well, you'll be able to do a good dispensing. You have to be very careful about what corridor to select. Majorly, like, whenever we are calculating the fitting height also, sometimes what happens is we calculate directly below the design. So sometimes if your PD is really in, you calculate what is from here till here. But ideally, your fitting height has to be from the fitting cross till the deepest part in the frame. So this is the deepest part. So I will measure from here till here and I'll take this as a fitting height. So when you're giving fitting height, you have to be very careful. When you're choosing the progressive design, you have to be very careful. Okay. Now, going forward, this is one perspective which talks about corridor. You can also look at this whole concept from PD. And this is important. This is what I generally advocate when I do my trainings is that you have to check for PDs. Whenever these three shapes comes in, and if your customer has good PD, when I say good PD, like say anything at 30, 30, 31, 32 is fine. But if they have PDs which are like say sub 30s, then it is going to be a challenge. I'll just show you what happens if the consumer is going to have a narrow PD. Okay. So earlier the example was of 31, 32. Now in this case, let's take 28, 28. Fitting height remains same. Okay. Now say your right eye PD, because it is 28, it is inside. And let us try putting a lens on top of this. Now, once we are trying, like even here, I'm not cut it, but once I'm just putting a blank on top of this, you can see what is happening. Like, if your PD is in, distance definitely compromised, near compromised, lens is in, and overall you will see like, the die is not enough. Even if I take the biggest possible lens, I'll not be able to fit it because the PD demand is really in, it's too in, right? Now, if it is going to be again a shorter lens. You can see here, maybe the design is well placed, but you can see there is a issue with the overall blank dia. Design fits well, it is within the frame, it is fine, almost like near zone is covered up to 80-85%. Only a small portion is getting cut. Still, it is doable. But ideally, if this frame comes in with a PD which is 28, you should really think about whether you want to give this or you want to change the shape or change the frame. Now, if the very same model is with a smaller size, like say mostly your cat eye frame comes with a size which is 53, 54, but if the A size, if this horizontal size is under 50, then you can very well dispense this. Okay. But for progressive, what happens? Like say what you're saying in both the cases, you can see the add area like this. If you have a distortion developing here, you will see that almost 30% of the frame actually carries the distortion. This is clear area. Maybe here the distortion is really minimum. So nasally the distortion becomes minimum, but temporarily distortion is really high. So when consumer wants to use, when this customer wants to use the periphery, it becomes really challenging. Now, on the other hand, on the contrary, if you have wide PD, right? So let us take a PD which is 34, 34. Now here you will see that the PD is really wide out. And when you place the lens, what happens if the PD is wide? And even if you're taking a regular corridor, in this case, you can see almost 60-70% of the near zone is within the frame. And you have distance zone, which is almost covered, a good enough distance area as well in the regular corridor. So just imagine like earlier we saw progressive design regular corridor on a average PD which is 31, which was literally not covering the entire area. There was a zone cutting down the dia was not enough, reading zone compromised, distance zone compromised. But when you say the PD is just wide, nothing has changed, only the PD has changed here, and you can see the very same regular corridor is fitting well, right? And obviously for your short corridor, it is always go. So here, basically, what the key message that is driven here is never say no directly to your consumers, because as the spectacle frames are now fashion accessories, you will have to tweak, you will have to customize designs for them. You will have to understand what could be the best possible fit for that particular frame. And accordingly, you can actually select a corridor. Also, before finalizing the frame, if you find that customer has narrow PD, go with a frame size which is smaller. Customer has wide PD, you are blessed. You can actually dispense them with any special design, special frame design that you want to dispense. Okay, so be honest about style, cosmetic, and frame compatibility to the prescription. This is very important for us because if you are not honest while recommending, then at end of the day, like everything goes for a mess, because your expectation and reality completely change. Your customer would expect an outcome which is really good, but in reality, it goes out of the way. So it is important that you consider this simple basic parameters while dispensing. Uh, Take home message. Generally, you are open to dispense any frame for progressive lens. You will need, say, bare minimum expertise in terms of understanding that wider the PD, better you are in a position to give any frames to the customer. If the PDs are narrow, please ensure that you are available for your customer at every step so that they are not getting disappointed. With the modern setup and layout, wherein the frames are open for your consumers to try, it is always important for you to be with them, provided if you feel that definitely the customer has narrow face, and with modern designs in place, it is going to be really challenging for you in case if they end up selecting a frame and then you say that, okay, we'll not be able to do it. So it is always better to be along with them during the journey. And the rules that we spoke about progressive also follows for a single vision. As you are aware that even freeform single vision lenses will have a fitting cross, which needs to be bisecting, or it should be right against the pupil. You also have to make sure that the frame selections are done properly even for single vision cases. Okay. So as just a quick recap on the frame. One is like existing frame, make sure that you know what customer like in the old frame. The frame that you're selecting for a progressive dispensing has to be adjustable so that if there is any discomfort, you can just do a minor adjustment and make sure that your consumers are happy with the progressive design. Special shape will require a special dispensing. If I have to just point out, what we spoke about is select a corridor according to the frame size. Please ensure that you are aware of PDs. Make sure for a smaller PD, you go with smaller A size, larger PD, anything beyond 32, you are in a comfortable position to dispense any special frames as well. And then always give honest opinion to your customer. If you feel that PD is really narrow, and even if you have found out a frame which can actually fit the progressive lens, for narrow PD, the peripheral disturbances is going to come more inside the frame, and your customer might not be feeling comfortable to adapt. Okay, if you miss, generally what happens is you topple over. So basically, what we are going to cover, in the future session also is we have prescription as a first stage, which we discussed during the last session. For what prescription, what progressives you should be selecting. We discussed about the frame selection today. I'll be just giving you a heads up about what I'm going to cover next week on the design, and measurement and QC will be the future process. Now, when it comes to design overall, I just wanted to quickly touch base on this. Next week, we are just going to cover quickly on how our progressive design made, how you will differentiate between conventional progressive design and a freeform design, how a simple measurement will help you identify, and basis this, how you are going to just talk about different designs to your customer. So this is going to come up during the next session next Tuesday. I would want to just spend quick 1 hour with all of you discussing about this. This will actually give you better understanding in terms of prescription to design, whether conventional designs are good, what for what prescription conventional should be considered, what are double surface progressive, what are freeform progressives, how they are different, how you will identify in your regular practice whether the lens that you have in hand. Because the common thing which happens is there could be claim from the company, from the manufacturers, and you trust them for sure, right? Because they are in the market, they have been doing a lot of lenses, but there is always a certain verification and validation from your end. Now, how do you ensure, how do you actually do that, those verification at your end in your own capacity, at your own clinic or own outlet, is something which I am going to just share next week. For now,